Good evening, everyone. Good evening, TDN and listeners and viewers, and also especially those of you who tune in particularly to this week in interview. Welcome to another weekly episode of this week in interview with your host and guide, yours truly, Anthony Drago. It's a pleasure to be here as always. I always look forward to this time. This week in interview gives me the opportunity to really talk to people that I wouldn't normally find and mix with in my everyday life, in my profession, and so I'm absolutely grateful. Last week, I actually spoke to a former prime minister of the island of Dominica, Mr. O.J. Serafin. The weekend before that, I spoke with political analyst, political scientist Alex Bruno, and so on. And this week is no exception. I'm talking to Mr. Lennon Mathew, a geologist with a tremendous experience working in North America, but very, very familiar with um, not just the hardcore technical geology, but the it exists within our society and how the role it plays and how it influences our thought patterns, our behavior, and what we can do to leverage the advantages that our particular location in the Caribbean Sea, in the tropics, with rainforest, with rivers, with certain types of rock, um, how we can think about that and see how we can pattern our way of life, our living to mitigate against risk and to take advantage of opportunities that those present. Advantages by virtue of the fact that we have a lot of water, by virtue of the fact that we are mountainous, all of those things. And so I've had Len on the show before, and usually before the start of the hurricane season, we talk about preparedness. We try to do it differently, where we don't just talk about making sure you can collect water and you have batteries and your matches are dry, can be kept dry. Those are things that you know already. But we spoke about how you can make yourself more resistant, more resilient. And one of the things that we spoke of the last time that Len was on with me talking about hurricanes was how we know that an island is going to get hit by an hurricane. How can we take advantage of that? How can we prepare ourselves so that it's not just doom and devastation, there are also economic benefits and activities that could come out of that? And lo and behold, this year it was Jamaica's turn. Jamaica number was called, and Hurricane Melissa made landfall as a Category 5 hurricane. And so how prepared was Jamaica to respond? And how is Jamaica responding? And how the people of Jamaica who have suffered the pain, can they get some gain from having experienced the hurricane? And so Len and I had a conversation, and we decided that we would come on air and share that conversation with you. So let me bring Len up. Len, welcome. It's always a pleasure to have you on this weekend interview. Uh, our conversations that we have, uh, we go beyond, making sure you have batteries, making sure you have dry matches, crackers, things that people, if you're living in the region and you don't know that as yet, for the hurricane, then natural selection might be, you know. So, but what I'm saying is that people know that what people expect from us, um, engineers and geologists and managers and thought leaders and so on, thinkers, is guidance to think about it in a different way. I mean, for the countries where they live in the Alps and different mountains with snow, they learn to ski and they learn to integrate the cold and icy conditions into their way of life. People who live in the desert, similarly, people who live um, where there are monsoons, similarly. We're in the Caribbean. What we have are hurricanes, and sea and ocean. And in Dominican, in particular, we have mountains and we have forests and we have rivers and we have rocks of a certain type. And so our discussion tonight is centered around hurricanes because that is fresh in our mind. Jamaica having just had a real beating, at least certain parts of Jamaica having a real beating from Hurricane Melissa. But as you see that unfold year after year, year after year, let's set the tone for the discussion. Let's just start the tone where you just express your thoughts about how one of the most predictable things about the Caribbean is that an island is going to get devastated by a hurricane. How
Yes.
can we leverage that? If you can predict what's going to happen in the stock market, people make millions from predicting that, right? How can we benefit from the knowledge that almost every year an island, a community of people are going to be devastated by a monster hurricane?
Hey, thanks, Drago, for having me back again. I know, as you said, the last time we had that conversation, it was in anticipation of the hurricane season, which starts in May every year and ends on November 30th. So we have a few more weeks in the hurricane season. But for those who have probably heard me before, we always look at hurricanes as natural disasters and disasters. But these things are really natural phenomena, and hurricanes play and storms play an important role in the heat transfer from the tropics to the poles. It involves some chemistry, some physics, and all the sciences. If you understand condensation, evaporation, heat transfer, that's what hurricanes are. They are natural systems. They become disasters when they impact human existence. But I think over the years we have convinced ourselves that we are the most important things on this planet Earth and the most important things in the universe. And I I I have a different perspective on that based on my background. And when we had that conversation, the thought process was, every year we've had hurricanes. And if you take a quick read, you can see historical documentation of hurricanes that have impacted the Caribbean from the 1800s and beyond to today. And you can see the economic impact, the impact on livelihoods. So it tells us that even after you and I become fossils, there will still be hurricanes because it's just a natural process. And having that conversation on the economic impact or how we can benefit from that is not far-fetched because there are examples. And one of the things I like about geology is you really have to understand those earth systems and how they shape our landforms, how they shape our coast, how the mountains are created, what are the impacts of volcanoes, earthquakes. All these things are natural processes that we cannot do without. They happen. So if you take a case study and you look at Japan, for example, Japan is in a very active seismic zone on one section of what they call the Ring of Fire in the Pacific. And because they've had tsunamis and earthquakes for thousands of years, the last huge tsunami impact, as a matter of fact, there are rocks in certain places in Japan that are over 600 years old that are telling people do not build beyond this point. And the reason why they're there, it's because over 600 years ago, the residents of the cities knew the impact of tsunamis. Well, guess what? People failed to pay attention. A lot of people died when the Fukushima disaster happened. I can't remember the year exactly. Then we have places like the Netherlands. The Netherlands, if you look at the Netherlands, it's an area that's sinking. It's been inundated by encroaching oceans. And from a historic, from a geologic perspective, there's what they call transgression and regression, where the oceans over millions of years have shown have encroached forward into continents and go back. So we're talking about a long time drive. And
Hmm.
these people have gotten so good in existing, in surviving, and I'd like to bring up the old cliche that survival is the mother of invention. They have gotten so good in managing the hazard that exists in Netherlands that they're the best in the world when it comes to building on waterlogged or flooding areas. I mean, these guys build flood control system that's second to nowhere else in the world. So they've developed that technology because of the hazard that constantly exists in the environment. When you talk about um, uh, 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 earthquake earthquake mitigation, you go to Japan because that's a hazard that exists in the environment, and they've built their education system, their infrastructure, the economy around this kind of hazards. So you mirror that and you transfer that to the Caribbean. What have we had? We've had hurricanes every year for the last 100 years of our history and beyond.
400 years.
For hundreds and hundreds of years in our
Yeah,
history. So, some were small, people didn't know. I can remember my grand aunt telling us about Hurricane Iris when she was
yeah.
young, and
Hurricane
how
Helene. Yeah.
and Hurricane Helene, and
Mhm.
how they could tell there was a hurricane. Sometimes the sea was rough, and they could tell there was something happening. And back then there wasn't communication. So hurricanes have been hitting the Caribbean for hundreds and possibly thousands of years. So we cannot escape it. And I think for far too long, every time a hurricane happens, we go into a mode of not just survival, but we sit in a corner and we expect things to be done for us. And I think what as I showed you the example of Japan and Netherlands, what it does, survival, the hurricane creates an environment where the human being needs to survive. And I think that just that environment should generate that creative juices in us to be able to build our infrastructure, new technology. Why are we not the ones who have the best experts in hurricane prediction, in marine science, in ocean currents? We're surrounded by water. That's what we're surrounded by. And if we talk about resilience, which is the big word being used right now, resilience is not sitting and waiting for somebody to bring something for you. Resilience is being able to adapt, adjust, innovate, create, and survive and thrive. That's what resilience is all about. So if we are inundated with hurricanes year in year out, and we have not realized that it's an existential situation with hurricanes that we're not going to get away from, you have to ask yourself a question: when how can we get the best out of the circumstances or the pressures that we have on us to survive? And the reason why I say that, because being in the US for 20 something years after I came to school, I notice every time a hurricane hits any of the Caribbean islands, the first places that go out of goods and supplies are the Walmarts, the Home Depots, and so
Yeah.
on. So what that tells you is it creates a need for something. Well, a lot of times when we talk about economic growth and economic development and economics, I think we fail to realize the biggest component of economics is consumption. Without consumption, there's no need for the transfer of goods and services and money. And for reference, the US, which is the largest economy of the world, two-thirds of the US economy is driven by consumption. And people wonder, why is the US rich? The US is rich because, yeah, they may have a fault in overconsumption. And if you understand what consumption is, then for you to consume something, you have to produce something, right?
Yep.
And for you to produce something, there has to be a need. So what the storms and the natural disasters do is they destroy, just like volcanoes, just like earthquakes, just like floods, just like every
Avalanche. Everything.
avalanches, just like every natural disaster, just like every natural phenomena, they create a need. Even war, Drago, which is the ultimate form of survival. And I'm drawing this reference to show you what happens. The cell phones we have, the internet we have, the jeeps, the aeroplane, the telephones, the satellites, all these innovations, you know what drove them? War. Because man tried to get an advantage over each other in the most desperate time for survival, which is war. And as a result, a lot of technology innovation. I mean, you talk about medicine. All these things have been driven by by conflicts. So I'm not saying that conflict is a good thing, but what I'm saying is the natural progression of innovation is the need for human beings to survive. And as a result, we consume goods, we consume services, and is in that thought process that we realize, because hurricanes are something that we've had for hundreds of years in our existence in the Caribbean, thousands of years and possibly millions of years in the Caribbean region, then we ask ourselves the question, how are we going to benefit? And I think that's what we will talk about a little later once we start diving into why we should have that mindset. And as I said, we talk about economics. There is no economics if there's no consumption. How do we increase economic growth? You get more consumers. How do you get more consumers? You market, you do all this stuff, you provide more goods and services, people buy, people need money to transfer that. That's what economics is all about. So yes, there is war somewhere. Sorry about that.
Energy
my
conserving, right?
yeah, my lights went off. Yeah, I got a time on my lights to get up when I'm sitting in the office too long. But here's the deal. When there is war, what it creates is a need for food, for ammunition, and all this stuff. There are lots of people who invest in these things. Sadly, I don't agree with it, but it's the reality. It requires the production of metal. It requires the production of fuel. It has
Yeah,
labor.
weapons,
As a
bullets.
matter of
Yeah,
as a matter of fact, when the U.S. was going through the Great Depression in the 20s, it was the war that took them out of that Great Depression. When the men went out to fight, there was a need to provide goods and services, material, equipment for the men in the service, and that's where the women came in, and that helped build back the U.S. economy during that time. Do I agree with it? Absolutely not. But the point I'm trying to make is that the need for survival and these actions, these natural events, create what they call a need. And we ask ourselves, seeing that I don't have control over the hurricanes, how can I, one, survive? How can I, two, create the goods and services that is needed immediately after the hurricanes? And how can we come together as a Caribbean to make sure that whatever needs, whatever goods and services, whatever void that is created, we can supply it using the economic mindset and the economic model?
yeah. And so I, I like the way that you introduced the topic, Len. And for those of you who joined a little after we began, my guest tonight on this weekend interview is Mr. Lennon Mathew. He's a geologist, but he's just a thought thinker. Those of you who listen to some of the radio stations in Dominica might be familiar with his voice. And his contributions are always relevant and practical. There might some of you listening to us in Dominica on RVR Jams Radio on DigiPlay channel 59. Good evening to you, and also in the Toronto market online radio SBE, primarily serving mostly a Haitian community in the Toronto area. You will be familiar with what we talk about because Haiti has been the subject, the victim of a couple of natural disasters, landslides, and even hurricanes as well. Of what we're talking about is how do we, is there a benefit if we were to shift our perspective in the way we regard a hurricane? Do we just sit and pray that the hurricane is going to pass and leave us with minimal damage and we totally at the mercy of the hurricane? Or do we recognize that where we're located, like for example, Dominica. Dominica is always in the crosshair of every hurricane. Some of them turn a little north and they miss us. Some of them turn south and go around us. But when you draw the line, the trade winds come straight at us. Uh, what are we doing to say, okay, we if how can we make ourselves more hardy and more resistant to hurricane? But beyond that, because lately resilience has become almost a bad word in Dominica, where people talk about making the island resilient and so on and so forth. But the application of the resilience, when you examine it, is not there. But as a region, as individual islands in the Caribbean, how can we leverage the knowledge that we should have been accumulating about hurricanes? So, for example, in 1979, I have clear memories of Hurricane David. And I was not in Dominica for Hurricane Maria, but a lot of the stories we heard about Hurricane Maria seem to mimic Hurricane David in 1979, except for the fact that we have more technology with Maria, and so we had more warning. We had more advanced warning. We had, or hopefully, our knowledge of building and building materials and building techniques should have been improved to where we could have had better buildings. Uh, but Maria seemed to have devastated and disrupted life in Dominica as much as Hurricane David did, or even more. So is it that we did not learn anything in the 40 odd years that separated the Hurricane David and Hurricane Maria? And also what Len alluded to, does the fact that we get hit by hurricanes, um, does that provide opportunity, economic opportunity, entrepreneurial opportunities, and so on? How can we change our mindset from one of being a victim that's at the mercy of Mother Nature to where we can say, okay, this is what Mother Nature sends to us. How can we make it a gift by minimizing disruption, minimizing loss of property, minimizing loss of life, but also taking the advantage. So Len asked the question about the Great Depression. The war took America out of the Great Depression, but also what happened was that they went out and did construction. The national parks, the highways, and all those things were started to generate employment. Now, Dominica experienced Hurricane Maria in 2017, and almost all of our housing stock was devastated. Shouldn't we have seen a boom in the economy because we had to rebuild all of those houses, we had to rebuild all those roads, we had to rebuild, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars spent in a small economy like Dominica in a period of 2 to 3 years should have really gave the economy a huge bounce. That's not how we want to get it, loss of life. The other point I want to make, I'll go back to Len with a couple of questions, is that I was listening to the radio this morning, and Jamaica, the death toll was at 45, with 15 people missing. Now, Jamaica has a couple million people, right? Dominica has maybe 50,000, 60,000. Hurricane Maria killed more people in Dominica. And I'm talking per capita, in absolute numbers. Hurricane Maria killed more people in Dominica than Hurricane Melissa killed in Jamaica, even if Melissa stayed over Jamaica longer than Maria did, with maybe equal winds or even stronger winds. Is Jamaica doing something that Dominica can learn from? So the next time we get a Category 5 hurricane, we wouldn't have so much loss of life and so much loss of property. What? So I'm going to go to you, Len. Let's talk about that, because that is a stark reality. You have 50,000 people in Dominica, and you had almost twice the amount of death as so far they've reported in Jamaica. Even if you
So
say, okay, it's early yet, and maybe all thing is not yet reported, but still, I
yeah,
was amazed when I heard this morning it was only 45 deaths and 15 people missing out
yeah,
of millions.
yeah.
And we had more than that out of 50. I'm saying 50,000. They keep saying 70,000 Dominica. I don't think I think Dominica has more than 50,000 people.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that because I have some notes there, and that's one of the things I put down there. And the most important thing is human life, right?
Mm,
You lost if you lose somebody who has a lot of talent, it's sad because that talent goes with that individual. So
right.
human life is always critical, and that's why it's important to share your gifts and talents so other people can suffice if people gone. But you're right. So the statistics say about 45 people lost their life in Jamaica as a result of Melissa, with 15 missing. And we all know between in Dominica, between Maria and Erica, we lost about 250 people in Dominica.
Yeah.
So you have to remember what are some of the hazards that hurricanes bring. You're talking about waves, you're talking about rainfall, Not necessarily rainfall, but heavy rainfall. Excess rainfall will cause landslides. Based on our topography in Dominica, we're pretty mountainous. If you have unstable soils, if you have waterlogged soils, it creates a recipe for secondary disasters. So you have flash floodings, with your rivers. These things kill more people than the wind, by the way. So it's the other things that hurricanes bring that cause issue. But the reason why I want to highlight on the death is and everything in life is about perspective, right? Because we get all this, and I'm not downplaying that by any means. But here's where perspective comes in. We hear a lot, and that's not just Jamaica. That's every other country we hear disasters. We hear a lot about hurricanes coming, hurricanes coming. It's gonna be a category 5. It's disastrous. Only 45 people are lost their life and about 15 missing. If you take a look at the murder rate in Jamaica, within the last 10, 15 years, probably 17,000 people got killed in Jamaica as a result of murder and violence.
Right.
Over 1,000 people per year in Jamaica killed through violence. So if we had to put the storms and you have to look at that, the society or social fabric is causing more loss of life than the hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get hurricanes every year. You don't get a major storm every year in one country. But my point is, even as we talk about 45 deaths, then it makes you wonder. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, but look at over 17,000 people died in Jamaica from murder the last 10, 15 years. I haven't heard an outcry. I heard an outcry about the hurricane that killed only 45 people. Yes, there's destruction of property because that's important, right? And it makes me think of, well, if a hurricane that strong is only killing 45 people, are we seriously should be as worried as we are about hurricanes than our own selves? You see what I'm getting
Mm-hmm.
at?
Yeah, the
So,
chances of getting killed by violence is so much higher
by gun violence
than
in
by a
Jamaica is
hurricane.
higher than
Yeah.
getting killed by a category 5 hurricane.
Yeah.
That's the point. So understanding the hazards that come with the hurricane, I think one of the first things that we could have done is your infrastructure, right? There is the Mona campus, there's the Cave Hill campus in Barbados, there are several universities in the Caribbean. I don't know what their engineering school is about, but for a region that has hurricanes every year, with hurricane season lasting half of the year, I think most of our education system or higher learning system should have a greater focus on how we innovate, how we engineer and design simple structures. Um, a few years ago, the Venezuelan government gave the Dominican government petrocasas. They were houses that were put for people made of some kind of material, and as soon as the hurricane passed, they were blown away.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm saying to myself, if you're going to make that investment, why don't you partner with our educational institutions so that you can use the intellectual capacity of the people in the region? You are in a living lab. All you have to do is set up an experiment, put it there, leave it there for 6 months, and I guarantee you within 5 years, you're going to get a live test. And I think when we learn from this experience, then we build better for our infrastructure. That way we can save more lives. Secondly, you look at your physical attributes. So as I mentioned, Dominica is a little different from Jamaica in the sense Jamaica is a really limestone country. It's based on its location in the Caribbean. Dominica is pretty much volcanic with a lot of unconsolidated soil material. And one of the things that holds our topsoil and our soils together is the large volume of trees and the tree roots we have. You take that tree cover over, any rain that falls is going to wash away a lot of that material. So you have not just the hurricanes, but you have the landslides that have caused a lot of death in Dominica. So you got to first think, okay, where I'm living, what are the things that may happen in my area? And I mean, I don't have to explain it, Drago. We had examples in south of Dominica. We had examples in places like Good Hope. We had several examples in Dominica in the north, where I'm from, in Dodan. We had rivers that opened up their channels that had been running as little streams for a long time. You look at your drainage patterns. You look at where your housing planning. are we factoring in the potential hazards from these natural disasters? Are we doing that 100-year plan? Are we doing the flood surveys? Are we doing the modeling that is necessary to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to rate this place on a hazard level 1 for very severe, 2 for pretty severe, and and put a scale to it and decide, okay, for those areas I may have to have higher insurance rate because
Exactly.
your
Right.
chances of having disaster, having destruction from a hurricane is higher. Are we doing this kinds of work when it's not hurricane season? This thing has to be policy. These things have to be policy driven. So on a policy framework, are you looking at your plans? Your planning division making sure that they're enforcing the building codes, the building rules, how you do your roof, how you do this kind of things, so that you can cut down on the chances of people losing their lives during hurricane. Because you build a house not just to stay, you build a house for protection
To
from
protect
the
people.
elements. And if the weather was perfect, there were no wild animals. You don't need a house. You could sleep outside. I mean, I'm serious. You could sleep in a tent. But it's not just about sleep. It's your protection from the elements. And if one of the biggest disasters we have is hurricanes that affect us every year, then after 300 years, after 400 years, and we still building, we still not using our intellectual property or intellectual capacity to develop new structures. As a matter of fact, Drago, let me give you a perfect example. If you look at some of the houses in places like Portsmouth, the older houses, you notice their design with the high hip roofs. Some of them had hurricane shutters. Some of them had design, and they withstood category
All this
3
stuff.
hurricanes.
Yeah. Hmm.
The house I grew up in Benz, a little wooden house, my grand auntie built. During hurricane season, they would put wood prop on the side of the house, and that house withstood Hurricane David. And if you notice, a lot of the houses had hurricane shutter windows. Why isn't that a staple design in our houses? People do that just for design, so you don't have to go back every year and buy plywood and put in frame. Design the house so that when hurricane come, you can do the mechanical stuff that protects your windows, protects your doors, and so on. Design our roof. We have the technology, but apparently, as time went by, I think what happened is in our architecture, in our design, we have failed to include natural disasters. I want to say natural disasters, natural phenomena that dictate our existence. And I think too many times we fail to account for those. And can you imagine if the Japanese were building skyscrapers, building buildings without proper reinforcement, proper rebar, and after earthquakes upon earthquakes, not factoring the fact that they're living in a high risk seismic zone. Can you imagine the amount of loss of life?
Right.
And not just Japan. There is Mexico City.
There's
There's California.
California. Hmm.
There's California. So that has to be part of your governance structure. It has to be part of your day-to-day life. What frustrated me is that every time you don't hear anything about hurricanes, except when hurricane season. Oh, you make sure you have batteries. Make sure you have. I mean, I mean, for God's sake, if I'm living in a place that have hurricanes for 100 years, and you still have to tell me to hold batteries and extra stuff during hurricane season, I mean, we're not moving past that. We're not learning anything. If you still have to remind me to hold extra food during hurricane season, then we're not moving past resilience. So how can we be resilient, and we still have to wait for somebody else? So that moves to where the economics comes in, and Jamaica did something pretty smart. Now, on a day-to-day basis, I mentioned insurance earlier, and you can have different grades of insurance for where you live in, because we all know, like what happened in Dominica, if your insurance is not prepared for losing 90% of the stock, they're just not designed for that. Any
Nope.
insurance can go bankrupt.
You go
So
bankrupt because
there,
of that.
there has to be a state support system. And for small populations like us, we cannot do it on our own. That's why there has to be regional cooperation, regional integration. The Caribbean region, including the Bahamas and the Greater Antilles, have about 40-something million people.
Yeah.
When I started earlier, I talked about consumption. I talked about economic growth requiring consumers. With 44 million people, you have a market of consumption. The state of Texas doesn't have that amount of people. The
Right.
state of Florida doesn't have that large population. But this countries, this cities and these states, why they have economic activity is because people have disposable income. They can buy and sell produce. The only thing that separates us is couple miles of water. You understand what I'm saying, Drago? So
Hmm.
so I think when we looking at the economic part, it cannot be per island. I think it has to be on a
It has to be
regional level.
regional.
Regional
Regional.
level.
Hmm.
And Jamaica, what Jamaica did is they took 150 million catastrophic insurance coverage on the World Bank, and they risked it against the capital market. So you're talking about a capital market that is about $50 billion in revenue. And Jamaica, 150 million dollars on that is just about 0.003%. I did the calculation, right? So what they really did is they basically paid for their own insurance. Investors took bonds on that insurance, and they would pay it back after a certain period. Well, Jamaica just renewed that last year, and their disbursement is going to be based on the level of the disaster and certain qualifiers. For example, the millibars, and they basically broke up Jamaica into different pressure systems and so on. And because that hurricane meet the threshold for the insurance, there might be a disbursement. There may be a disbursement of $150 million US dollars for the recovery of the Hurricane
Yeah, I
Melissa.
heard them announce it. I heard the Prime Minister announced that the disbursement is imminent. They
Yes,
confirmed that they're going to get the disbursement.
exactly.
Hmm.
And the intellects out there are telling you that might be the model moving forward for small developing countries like Dominica and the Caribbean for hurricane relief. What that does is, when the hurricane has created the void or the need for goods and services, the country can now tap into those funds and ensure that they procure material, equipment, services from regional countries and from countries with North America. I get it. They do a lot of production, and the reason why I'm stressing on the Caribbean doing that as a whole. Take for example, after Hurricane Maria, there were Jamaicans, there were St. Lucians, there were all kind of people from other countries working in Dominica. Drago, they were not working for free. They were getting paid.
Hmm. And sending money back. Yeah.
What do you think they did with that money? My sister lost her roof. The insurance paid her. She was able to get a family member who works on roofing in Guadeloupe to come back to Dominica. By the time he was done, he probably made $15,000 on about 10, 20 roofs in Dominica.
Hmm.
That is economic activity. Now, guess what he can do? He can take care of his mom. He can build himself a home. He can put some money in the bank. He can buy food. He can buy drinks. So you see where that's going, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of the
A
day,
multiplier.
it's a multiplier. So
Hmm.
if Jamaica is smart with what they have, they would try to ensure that that $150 million stays circulating within the country. Because as much as they get that insurance, the point is not just to build back stuff and we go back to the same place we were. It has to be an influx of cash into the country that's much needed for the banks, for the grocery stores,
Yep.
for the food vendors. That's why there has to so you can't just do hurricane preparedness for the 6 months. The whole year you have to think about, okay, when should I raise my chicken? When should I plant food crops? When should I have certain things? Can we have like a warehouse in a couple Caribbean islands that have a surplus of material that
Material.
when we have a disaster, we can tap into our insurance fund and buy in St. Lucia or buy in Grenada? And vice versa, when the disaster happens to them, then they can spend in the other Caribbean islands. That is where you need cooperation. We all come from the same boat, and we have to start thinking that way. And as much as we talk about resilience within the Caribbean region, as much as we've spoken about Caribbean integration, these are the kind of things we should have been doing. Because for some reason, whenever a disaster strikes, we like to pretend that we're poor and we're stupid and we're incapable, so that the same Europe we don't like, the same North America we don't like, can bring us aid and give us stuff. Well, guess what? For them to be able to do that, their economy have to be great. And I keep telling people, you go to a business and you ask that business for donation. Well, that business have to make a profit so it
So it
can
can
give
give you a
donation.
donation. Yeah. And that is so important for folks to understand, Len, that if you when you a hurricane when a hurricane happens and you and I and your brother and sister we send money to make a barrel to send down, or we
Yeah,
donate money and they buy the material at Walmart. Yeah, we're sending the material to Dominica, but we really boosting the US economy.
yeah.
We're not boosting our local economy.
But that's what happens.
And that is what that is that discussion. But Len, I need to take a quick break together with
Yeah,
from our sponsors. When we come back, we're going to continue that conversation because I'm not hearing that conversation happening anywhere else. You
yeah,
know, a few years ago, I did a program on a sovereign fund. I said that if Dominica is rolling in so much money from passports, why don't we take some millions of dollars and invest it so that we have a sovereign fund when there's a disaster we can withdraw from that to help us recover from that. But those two conversations they don't go far, you know. But when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. I think we have to brace ourselves that we will go for more than 60 minutes because this is a discussion that needs to happen. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Presented by. People say I've got a great smile. Well, I have to say, this is all thanks to the professional team at Beacon Dental Group right here in Dorchester, Massachusetts. I've got world-class dental care. Beacon Dental Group has expert and caring staff dedicated to providing the most advanced and satisfactory treatment in all aspects of oral health. Their services are designed to meet your needs and give you a perfect smile, too. General checkups, cosmetic surgery, Gemini laser service, and advanced procedures, all in a state-of-the-art facility. Call or visit Beacon Dental Group today, 1026 Blue Hill Avenue, Dorchester, Massachusetts, or call 617-282-2146 for a smile that lights the world.
Running a radio station shouldn't be chaos. It should be simple, smart, and professional. With Joan Premium, your entire week schedule is beautifully organized and easy to manage. Real-time accuracy keeps your listeners in sync with every show. Your visitors and audience sees the right schedule every time, wherever they are. They can even choose different time zones. From analytics to social media and native app integration, Joan Premium is the professional tool your station deserves. You're never alone. We provide priority support for active license users. We're building a community. Connect with broadcasters worldwide through our Joan Community Hubs. Choose your plan, annual flexibility, or lifetime freedom. Get Joan Premium today. www.gndenterprisesinc.com or call 877-698-9894 for more information.
Looking to promote your business, engage current customers, and reach new people? Well, look no further. From the basic presentation to a fully fledged advertisement, use your video ads to attract customers. At Man's Audiovisual Productions, we do just that. We produce videos for business and event promotions, product demo videos, animated explainer videos, fundraiser ads, and much, much more. Engage your clients and sell online. We customize the video to match your brand design. Guaranteed to play flawless on all devices, including smart TVs. Contact us at telephone number 203-690-4342 or 767-245-6238. Visit our website, mansaudiovisual.com, or email us at derekvideo@gmail.com.
All right. Thank you, folks, for staying with us through the break. My guest tonight on this week in interview is Mr. Lennon Mathew. He's a geologist, but in this capacity, he's more of a thought leader. and we're discussing hurricane economics, as I call it. What can we do to be better prepared for the hurricane when it hits an island in the Caribbean? And our discussion is more than beyond, making sure that we have flashlight and crackers and so on. Our discussion is even beyond making sure that we build homes that can withstand hurricane winds. I mean, that should be obvious. Our discussion is at the next level where we're discussing actually designing our society, designing our lives, creating policy where we have insurances that can help us. So we're not out there just begging. Yeah, we need help because even the most prosperous states in the U.S. require federal assistance when it comes. But guess what? Those states are actively paying into the federal government, and as Len says, the states themselves are contributing to the overall consumer development, the overall structure of the market to make sure that there is money in the pot to help them when they need it. And so that's the level of discussion that we have. We talked about Jamaica having insurance where they're expecting a payout of hundreds of millions of dollars. But beyond that, we're saying, okay, when you get that money, it shouldn't just be to go and charter a plane and go to Florida and fully plenish lumber. And so that money, it basically bounces one time in Jamaica and it's back out because you go buy a material out of the region, out of the country, out of the region. There should be things in place to make sure that that money gets actually injected into the economy. So banks is going to have some liquidity to lend to somebody who's lost their roof and they're looking for a loan to repair their house, or somebody's business that got devastated and they need some money to tide them over until consumption start going again. So then that by virtue is what we're talking about. We're talking about creating a society that is more sophisticated than just the bare, well, let's put down our head and survive a hurricane. Maybe even let's make sure our homes are strong enough so it can protect us. To me, those are just basic, primary responses and prep that we should have been past, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. To me, now where we are is that level of sophistication. And you mentioned the institutions and the education institutions in the region. I know, um, the seismic unit of view, we have been putting data readers at different points in Dominica and St. Vincent and other places that are prone to volcanic activity. And therefore, they do a good job of predicting and explaining when there is seismic activity that can help to allay the fears of people. But again, that to me is rudimentary. That's really primary. Where are institutions that produce such great minds that come to the US and Canada and the UK and take leadership roles? Why are they not producing folks in the region that can take the region to that level of, I call it sophistication, that is required.
So I'm glad you mentioned the UE Seismic Research Unit. And I remember I was in high school when we had the volcanic eruption in Montserrat. There were a couple of ladies from my community who lost their lives up there. And I remember back in the days, they relied on, some British volcanologists and people coming out there giving us information. And then fast forward to what happened in St. Vincent just a few years ago, and I was on a program talking about that with Dr. Simone. I gave the seismic research folks, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but they did an outstanding job in getting people out. And I think it's through the years and the experience. So when you ask where are the people, it tells you that we have the capability, the capacity, and the competency. And I think part of it is, one, our people don't believe in themselves. And I think, secondly, the leadership doesn't see the value of its human resource in its own advancement. Because too often we go out there looking for solutions. When the solution exists, among the people that live in the region. If I'm living in a place for 40, 50 years and I'm experiencing hurricanes and I do not know what hurricanes do, then I have a problem. So you cannot get somebody from Germany or from some other place of the world to come and tell me what kind of technology I need to put for hurricane resilience when I have to be facing it every day.
Every
It
year.
makes absolutely no sense. So I'm saying we have to look within ourselves and look at the capacity and the capability of our people and develop this kind of institution, this kind of competency, and realize that we are capable of creating solutions for our problems. And if you to be truly resilient is to be able to be self-sustainable in terms of your economy, in terms of your infrastructure, in terms of your intellectual capacity. You can't sit there and wait for somebody to come and do something for you and say you're resilient. It doesn't work that way. That means you're dependent. There's no resilience if you're dependent. So the thing about it is, I think when we have, as a region, we have to start selecting people who have vision, people who have proven themselves to be competent and capable to lead us. And I think that's part of where the problem starts. And instead of getting solutions, we are down a hole. We try to crawl out of the hole, and by the time we crawl out of that hole, we realize where we started off. And I think that's what we've had going around the region. Because look at how long CARICOM is along. Look at how long they talk about integration, but they don't know what to integrate on. It's a bunch of sitting around. The individualism doesn't work. Everywhere around the world, the big countries that we follow in, you've seen where they form in unions, the European Union, the Russian Federation. The Chinese are trying to make one colony, the United States of America. But we have 50,000 people, 100,000 people here. We cannot even afford to pay for insurance with 50,000 people, but we're not realizing 44 million people in the Caribbean region. Now you have a bigger pool from which to get the resources, where you spread the risk. That's what it's all about. Dominica, I think, had $1.3 billion in damage from Maria, and approximately 70,000 people leave Dominica. If you're not producing anything, how are you going to make back that revenue? Right. So obviously, if you're going to depend on another country, you can't be resilient. Here where the problem lies. So for you to be able to do that, your institution, your productive capacity, your small manufacturing, your large manufacturing have to be up to par. So during the regular year, while you service the 44 million people and get little markets for your canned breadfruit, your canned bread nut, you add value to your water. When the hurricane season comes, you already have that capacity. So Jamaica has $150 million. Right now, we should be sitting down with the Jamaican Prime Minister to see how we can sell bottled water to Jamaica, how we can provide them with enough breadfruit chips, bread nut, and those kind of things. Let that money stay and circulate within the Caribbean. So that's why I said earlier, your policy has to be one with vision. Your policy has to be people who are seeing beyond their faces to ensure that things work the way they're supposed to. People have money, they can afford insurance. Because if you're working for $2,000 and the cost of living for you and a family of 5 is $5,000, there's no way you can pay on insurance. So how are you going to pay insurance on your house when you can't even feed yourself? You have to make a decision. Once you have to make a decision between paying your bills, feeding yourself and your family, and paying insurance, guess what's going to suffer? The hurricane comes, the government doesn't have a security in place, then you left to square one. You see what happens, Drago? So at the end of the day, in addition to building the institutional capacity, we have to build a society that is cohesive, a society or region where the people are valued, not just for their skills, but to ensure that they have the necessary financial means to do the daily things that when disaster strikes, they can take care of themselves, their family. And then the government is there to support those who can't and to fill in the gaps. That's what they're there for. But if we are living in a region and a society where the unemployment rate is, you don't even hear them talk about. The unemployment rate is 50 or 60%. Most people are beyond the poverty line. Then how are we building resilience? How
Yeah,
are we using how are we using that $150 million US million? You don't want to, you can do the conversion into Jamaican dollars. How are we using that money to ensure that it stays and circulates and causes that chain reaction to build the country? After Hurricane Maria, they talked about Dominica growing about 10-12%. That didn't happen.
didn't
And I
happen.
can tell you the reason it didn't happen is because most of that money that was donated, if any at all, went right back out
Yeah,
into
it just bounced in Dominica and went back out like a
even
ball.
even
One bounce
even
and out.
when you look at the huge infrastructures that are going out in Dominica, built by for nothing against some of these folks. But guess what? If you're generating a revenue and you're using that revenue to pay somebody else from outside to do that work, where do you think that money is going? Your social security is missing out. The local shops are missing out. The construction industry is missing out. And if the Jamaican government is smart, with the 150 million US dollars, they can boost their construction industry, boost their local shops, boost their small manufacturing.
Small
That is what that
manufacturing.
money is supposed to do. And instead of recovery lingering for 15 years, it's probably 5-6 years. You've now created new employment. You have created new opportunities. And Drago, when we have these conversations, I like to use local examples. I'm gonna call out somebody I think we don't even Emo News. Emo News started as a response to people not being able to communicate with their loved ones during hurricane. Look at where she is right now.
Yeah, she has her own media company now.
Look at where she is right now.
Hmm.
She's got a media company that is giving us nightly news. I am sitting in my room in the United States and I'm getting news from Dominica from MO News,
Yeah,
international, Caribbean, regional news. That's the example of what I'm talking about. So a situation happened, but somebody saw an opportunity to the point where she can quit her job because she has a business that has developed as a result of disaster response. It's no different. It's a mindset. But if we had sit back and say, hey, last boy, you know what? And that's what we like to do. We sit back, hey, last boy, my radio,
let's
you
have
know what?
fair.
Hey, stop fair, no. Let's wait to see what America bringing for us in Europe. And our leaders run to the UN in tears, some of them crying, with their hands out and tell them, my people miserable and they can't do for themselves.
Yeah,
So they can
if you
keep,
don't help us, we cannot recover.
we cannot recover. But we want to boast we're going to be resilient.
And we're
And some
independent.
people
Yeah,
may take it personal, but it's a fact. So if a young lady with a cell phone and a YouTube channel during a hurricane can come from that to almost building a media empire in Dominica, why can't we do the same thing with the economy, with our infrastructure that is sustainable? So like I used the example of Japan and the Netherlands and California and those places, our mindset on hurricane preparedness and our mindset on what we can do out of hurricane should not be 6 months of the year. Our policymakers, our educational institutions, our business people, our regional leaders, our transportation people have to have in any economic planning that aspect of it, the disaster, the risk management, the risk mitigation. And if we don't, what happens? We get unprepared. And every time we get unprepared, we don't have adequate insurance. We don't have adequate manufacturing capability. We don't have adequate infrastructure. We didn't pay attention to simply cutting our branches and making sure that we have good drainage and making sure that our farming practices, making sure that our insurance allocation, putting a rating on which one has a higher payment based on your risk of where you live. When we don't do these things, then guess what happens? We in a washing machine in the Caribbean where we just being cycled year after year after year after year after year with the same problem. And I think it requires a change in mindset. It requires a change in attitude, and it requires a belief in ourselves to solve our own problems. Right.
yeah, because you know, I work as an engineer, and when you work, let's say we work in a manufacturing plant or in a construction thing, you try to make everybody go home at the end of the day with their 10 fingers and their 10 toes and their two
Yep.
eyes, right?
Yep. Yep.
So you put protective things on them, eyeglasses, protective gear.
Yep.
One more step safer to that is you put a guard against whatever the hazard is.
Yep.
But the real solution to have zero accidents is to implement operating procedures and
Yeah.
systems
Yeah.
that eliminate or reduce the risk in the first place.
Yep.
And that is the system thinking that I think we need to apply in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
The solution engineers and geologists and construction people are part of it. But really and truly, the solution has to come from the finance people who can think about how we need to organize our financial economy to be able
Yeah.
to fund it, or the economists, our insurance experts, our social people to know,
Yeah.
okay, if there's a village called Casabrus, what are the elements that we need within the village of Casabrus to make sure that when there's a storm approaching or when it's hit by a storm, we know who to call, who's responsible for what, where are the shelters, where's the resources, how many people in Casperus, how many people are of what age, how are they vulnerable, and who are the business people in Casperus that you can turn to now and say, hey, we need to use your backhoe, we need to use your bus, we need to do that. And where's the money to pay them so that they're not doing it as charity and
Yeah.
their business takes a 10-year hit as opposed to a boost because there's money to pay them to take their backhoe to clear a road. There's money to pay them to go and help my Alfred to to take her to the hurricane shelter. Every people are not just doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They actually can. There's actually money to help them get paid, and so that, in a nutshell, is where I think our conversation is. We should be past the physical. The physical is important. We don't leave it. It's necessary, but we
Yeah.
should be past the physical and we should be on the systems, your insurance system, your banking system, your financing system, your small business support system, your social fabric support system. And that's what we had. When we were growing
Yeah.
up, Hurricane David came and we had social league.
Yeah.
The women were organizing social league, and social league
Yeah.
could rally the women, rally each other, and we had the distribution of ration was almost a no-brainer because there was already a system in the village where people
Yeah.
were. And so it's not that I don't know what to do. It's like how do we move to where this can be more of the conversation that we have, in addition to the crackers and the batteries and the water containers and those things. We don't throw that out of the window, but that
Yeah.
is a given.
But
How
but
do
uh,
we
but
have that conversation?
here is another example. So even during Maria, people were making donations, and there were lots of canned goods and canned stuff that came down to the islands. They expired, and a lot of it was thrown away.
Hmm.
Well, if I am the guy producing canned goods and you buy $30 million worth of canned goods, it leaves my place and it goes to Dominic or elsewhere. And if it's expired, that's not my business.
That's
That's
not
not
our
my
business.
problem.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying? So you've already spent $30 million. I get $30 million of revenue. It goes to the disaster areas. If it's not used, then it goes to waste. I have also mentioned, and I mentioned it the last time, I think one of the errors I see in disaster relief is because the systems we've spoken about is not strong, like your banking, your financial systems, your social structure. People send a lot of clothing and items that frankly end up in the dump. There are case studies where in disaster relief for earthquakes in certain areas, people send so many old clothes and mismatched shoes. These industrial nations are looking for a place to dump all the waste they have, and they just send them over there. And they can be used. So you have huge piles of clothes being dumped and burned. So my thought is, why don't you have our system where people send cash? Because when I go to Walmart to buy a barrel in US and I spend $400-500 on just groceries, that's just me. then another $180, $200 to ship it. You're talking about $600-$700. And then by the time it gets there, you spend probably $200. You're talking about probably $2,000 for one person. You multiply that by about 5, 6, 7,000 people doing the same thing, and not just one barrel.
Right there.
You see the amount of money you could be sending back to the islands. And then if our systems are strong, then that money you send back into the region circulates into the local economy and help build us. So later on, the banks, the stores, the grocery stores, because that's what they need. And I think unless we do that and we get to that point, we cannot be resilient. I'm just telling you, we are going to spend the next 30, 40 years doing the same old stupid stuff, and we're not developing. And I think when people hear that they're getting assistance, too often we don't realize at the back end of it, there has to be production. There's a cost of production. There has to be consumption of those goods and services, like I first started off with. So when we send, let's say 10,000 Dominicans send groceries and stuff up there, you know, the society here is happy. The Walmarts, the Lowe's, they're going to find new employees. They're going to hire people because right now they need people to move those goods and services. So they hire in new staff. Well, guess what? That young person that just get a job, he can go to the restaurant and go to the grocery stores and buy dinner and buy lunch. And that's how you fuel an economy. And the guy at the restaurant decide, man, you know what? Now I have more people buying in my store. I need more beef. I need more chicken. So he goes to the farm and he says, hey, you know what? I need 10 extra pounds of chicken. So you see where the and we speak in layman's. There's nothing too complicated. Why can't we duplicate the same thing in Dominica? Why can't we duplicate the same thing in the Caribbean region? Why can't we identify the areas that are good for agri-production, the areas that are good for animal husbandry? You identify your resources. So when those disasters happen, you have already decided, if I'm making a chicken farm, I want to make sure that I have disaster mitigation and disaster response in mind. You have agreements with regional parties so that we know hurricane season is May to November. You make sure you have enough birds, you have enough eggs, just in case something happens. Then we can. There's always consumption. There's Creole Music Festival. There's Carnival. You have the consumption, but we don't factor those things in our response to disasters or anything else. There's no cohesive planning throughout the 365 days in the year. So then we find ourselves in the same situation. There is no insurance. There's no reserves. And then we find ourselves in the same situation, paying up debt, asking for debt forgiveness. The systems are not developed. The architecture is not developed. The education is still lacking. And we find ourselves back to square one every time a disaster strikes.
Yeah. And, a big part of it is data and data collection. And just data collection, data analysis, and to make decisions based on data. Again, it comes back to our schools and our education system. Where's that emphasis? Or the world economy has changed from agriculture and manufacturing to the most valuable thing now is data and information. We haven't seen that shift in our curriculum. That will now we will be raising a generation of people who are used to going to look for data to make a decision, knowing how to analyze data, knowing how to use the data, where to find it, how to collect the data, how to save it. Because without the data, we just making blind shot.
Hope
we connect.
And the data analysis is in business. It's mostly to give you an edge, to give you an advantage, to give you better predictions, better descriptions, whatever, and prescriptions. So you need that data to do three of those things that will hopefully give you an edge in business. But not only data, and as you mentioned, data. I've been in communication with the Met Office and giving them ideas here. They're collecting rainfall. They're collecting, information on the rivers. And I've said a lot of times, if you're trying to conserve, if you're trying to fix stuff, if you're trying to manage environmental or environmental components, you have to have data. You have to have information that helps you make good decisions. That's what they're there for. And when it comes to the education system, I think when we look at life on the basics, really and truly, you ask yourself, why are we here? It's you have your basic needs: food, clothing, and shelter. Most of what we do really and truly is to survive. Really and truly, as living organisms, most of what we do is for survival. That is why so many of our decisions, whether we consciously or subconsciously, are driven by our own personal survival. And personal survival might mean having more food, having more water, having more comfort, having more money, being able to do things. And that doesn't change in any society. So even the things that like I started saying, even the things that we've developed, the technology we've developed, the finances, it's driven by survival. And once we start in our school system understanding how all those components of our survival play, then we will start having a different education system. We'll start having an education for our survival, not just the survival, how we thrive in our environment. So you born and exist in an environment that has been impacted and shaped and transformed and controlled by hurricanes and natural disasters in the ocean for thousands of years. We're still there. So how today are we going to thrive in that environment? And for us to thrive in that environment, we must have a different approach than what we've had for the past 50, 60 years. It cannot be a situation of where we just every 3 months trying to see how we can get batteries, how we can get dry crackers, how we can get and not seeing beyond that, not seeing beyond the potential it presents itself.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we need to start focusing on.
Yeah, because as you said in your opening statement, human beings have sort of think that they're the most important species on the planet. But what makes human beings different is our ability to think.
Yeah.
So you have a Zandoli or you have a bird, and they sense the weather coming and they go into hiding.
Yeah.
After the hurricane passed, they come back out, they survive. Some of them did, some of them did not.
Yeah.
And next year hurricane come, they do the same thing again.
Yeah.
So as human beings, we cannot behave that way. We cannot behave where only when a storm is coming. So in May, we know we're in hurricane season. So what we're going to do to make sure we survive till November. Yeah. And then we forget about it again until next May.
Yeah, yeah.
So that doesn't make you any better than the Zandoli or the Begas or any one of those animals that just operate by instinct, that survival instinct. Yeah. We're supposed to, as human beings, be able to apply our mental faculty, which is what separates human beings from animals. But if we don't use it, and as we said, our ability to use it has to be based on something, and that something has to be data. And so maybe a big part of what we're discussing right now has to start or should start with the collection and the analysis and the use of data for decision making.
It's absolutely important. I mean, in every decision making, like I said, it makes you make better decisions. It's supposed to help you make better decisions.
You're not guessing.
Exactly. And even then, the validity of your data, the quality of your data matters, because you can collect data and they always say trash in is trash out. And if your data is obscure and you don't know how to collect the data properly, you can also make terrible decisions with bad data. So you need to know how to collect that data. You need to know how to sort that data, and you need to know how to identify the trends and patterns in that data, which is what helps you make the predictions and the better decision making. Some data it's straightforward. You look at economic in where we live in the US. I'll tell you how these people operate. There's a subdivision going on. That subdivision has, let's say, 400 houses. There are people who studied geography will go in there. They will find out what is the average income of this household, how many young kids in there, how many older folks in there, what is the projected growth for the next 50, 60, 70, 100 years. And based on that, they will decide whether they put in schools,
Yeah.
what kind of grocery stores, what kind of medical facilities, what kind of
Entertainment. Yeah.
resources, what kind of entertainment. They also look at what kind of hazards are in there. Are we living near a seismic zone? Are we next to
Flood zone. Yeah.
a fault line?
Hmm.
Are we next to a flood zone? These are the kind of things we think about when we live in a society. We don't do that. That's data collection on a different level.
Hmm.
Then when you build in your communities, you build in your education system, these things that exist has to be part of your planning and your decision making. That is the data collection. We don't seem to do that. And sometimes the data is collected and people don't pay attention to the data. And as I've said before, we wonder why are we going in circles, year in, year out. This year is Jamaica. Jamaica had the foresight to get what they call a catastrophic bond that they renewed just last year. So they had it for a few years. They renewed it last year. And the big part about that is spreading the risk of responding to disasters. Right now, there is something called ESG, environmental and social governance, which is big in business. So there are lots of companies who are willing to put parts of their profit into things like that. I have heard them talking about for the climate summits that have been going around. One of the big argument is putting some money in some funds like an insurance, either through the World Bank or for the Caribbean Development Bank, where when these disasters happen, the Caribbean governments can tap in there to ensure that they have for rebuilding. But I think if we build our institutional capacity, if we build our social capacity, if we build our intellectual capacity, if we build our economic capacity, we can also put things aside. I mean, Drago, this is not complicated. If you have a house and you have a family and you're making $500, you cannot just spend $600 and say I will do it tomorrow. You have to spend $200, pay your bills, and see how you can put $50 aside for dry days. It's no different. So collectively, we have to do the same thing with our country and our society. So I think our regional banking system has to come into play, putting these funds aside, whether it comes from the World Bank, whether it comes from the EU, and then the countries can access that. And there has to be policy that ensures that money is used within the country in our local industry, and the people are affected, so it can, one, get them back to normal quick as possible, and two, to sustain their self-sustainability. Anytime we have leakage of resources, anytime we have money just touching the place and going back out because it's not properly managed, then we are just in a washing machine, an intellectual washing machine, deprived washing machine that cycles you over and over and over again. We are putting people in position who do not know what they are doing, who have put their self-interest over the self-interest of their own people. And I think more importantly, you said something about human beings. I think one of the biggest difference between human beings and other animals is our level of consciousness and our level of awareness of self. That is a big distinction. And if we're not aware of ourselves, our capacity, our capability, our spirituality, our belief in I am able to survive based on my innate abilities, then we are getting nowhere and stuff. And it's a continuous cycle of poverty. It's a continuous cycle of stagnation, and we're not realizing the true potential for in the environment we live.
Yeah, so I think we've made the case So we can wrap up the conversation because what else we're gonna say? We need to think about the thing. We cannot continue living just on our five senses, based on what we touch, what we smell, what we taste, what we feel, what we see. You know, your pit bull, your Doberman, your cat. That's what they do. They get input on their five senses, and that's it. They react to that. We as human beings have the ability to to put a gap in there where we have that analysis, and we can project, and we can imagine, and we can create scenarios that doesn't come from any of the five senses. It comes from internal,
Yeah,
and that is what makes us different. And this conversation, that's what that conversation is about. This
yeah,
conversation is about moving beyond hearing the wind outside and ducking your head and hope and pray that you do that some projectile doesn't hit you and kill you, or a flood doesn't carry you away, or a landslide doesn't carry you away.
yeah,
To where we can say, okay, how can we control the circumstances in a sense that gives us a more of assurance that we will survive it, and that we have systems in place that's going to help us recover even better. And so
and
then
thrive.
and thrive. Yeah. And so I think we can bring the conversation to a close. I can make you do some closing remarks, and I think this is a wonderful conversation. We try to spread it around on social media, and hopefully some people will listen, and it might one or two people in the right places might be able to make a difference with it.
Yeah, well, Drago, as always, thanks for having me um, on your program. And action starts with dreams, goals, ideas, and if it stays in my head, it stays in your head. It goes absolutely nowhere. I have always said, I left home, studied geography for a couple of years, taught Caribbean geography in Dominica, spent 21 years doing environmental consulting, and at some point I have to be able to give back to my community. People don't have to listen, that's fine, but I think through conversation, through having this kind of discussion, it can level up the level of thinking we have, and create those ideas, and hopefully those ideas transform into action that has long-term consequences. So it's not unique to me. Many people may be thinking the same thing, just don't have the means to express it. So I really appreciate you giving me that chance to always come on your position.
Hmm. No, certainly, then. It's always a pleasure to have you on, because as I describe you as a thought leader, and everybody who hears your contributions over the airways, can identify that. You say what you have to say. You say it respectfully, but you say it courageously, and those who choose to listen can benefit from it. The idea is that we need to start to think about our circumstances. That's where we have to start, and not sit down and think about it forever. Think about it in the sense like, how can we make it better? How can we, 10 years from now, our children or whoever it is, sitting in Dominica, in St. Lucia, in St. Vincent, in Jamaica, and say, oh, but we had a hurricane. Well, that hurricane last week was sorry. Yeah, that wind, but there's a lesser amount of distress. I live in an office in the United States where every once in a while they have what they call a nor'easter, where it dumps a bunch of snow, it clogs everything off. Um, that lasts a day. Within a day, they've plowed hundreds of miles of roads. And then they have to do something with the snow. They have to dispose of it. The school is back in session within a day or two. Businesses are running again. We don't have hundreds of thousand miles of road. We don't have snow. What we have is hurricanes. You just need to learn to deal with it. We learn to. A noise, to people die. People die when there's a noise. So it's not like you will completely eliminate loss of life, but it's not that
No,
panic kind of reaction where you just put your head down and just hope and pray. That hope and pray thing is not getting us any solutions whatsoever. And so, folks, I want to thank you, Lennon, for coming on, and for the folks who contributed so much to the discussion: Sharon, Zed, Phil Senior, um, So Peter Carbon was on here, um, Margot, Sophie. We had a lot. We had a lot of interaction from the audience, and folks agree with us. And I think they understand what we're saying. They understand what we're saying. You know, human beings have been able to conquer almost every phenomena on the planet. If it's too harsh, they step away from it, let it happen, and then they step back in. We see people surfing waves that that look like if you go in there, it's going to tear you apart. But folks go in there and they surf and they come out of it alive and go back in. We see people ski down the steepest mountain slopes. We see folks trek across the desert. We see people go to
Yeah, I
to the
think
coldest regions of the earth and they come back alive. We see people climb the highest mountains. We only have some hurricanes to deal with. And they come often enough that we should understand them by now, and we can definitely conquer them and use them for our benefit. Eh, The Earlier in the year, we heard about the U.S. wanting to defund NOAA, which is the agency that does all the hurricane studies and sends a plane into the hurricane to get data and so on. As a Caribbean person, you feel ashamed because hurricanes happen to the Caribbean. Why do we have to depend on a plane that comes from outside the region
exactly
to
what I
go
said
into the
earlier.
hurricane? You know
Exactly
what
what
I
I
mean?
said earlier.
So,
Exactly.
so, so yeah, they should. If it's for us, they fund the no. They should defund no. They don't owe us
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
we should be able to say we have a plane. We have a plane that is based in Barbados or somewhere where eh, they're relatively safe from the storms, and they can take off and go into the eye of the storm, get the
yeah.
data, and come back out.
You come back out.
What's wrong with us?
Yeah,
Nothing. You know. So that's what this conversation is about, and not only at that aspect, but to mix it with our financing education, or economic education, or social education, to make sure that when those occasions happen and we have to expend funds, the economy benefits from those funds.
yeah.
So, Glenn, I think yeah, we had a good discussion. I thank you as usual for your time, and folks, there we had it. We had a good 90 minutes, well, almost 90 minutes of discussion, and spread it, share it. There's a lot of folks who view the program after the Wednesday, but just this one is particularly special. Share it if you know anybody who's in government in the Caribbean or in policy making position. Should send them a link. Maybe they're so busy they haven't thought of it. So send them a link. At least let it stimulate that part of their thinking. All right. So I'm saying good night, folks, and we will do this again next week Wednesday. Um, and for the folks in Jamaica, although we said the loss of life was minimal, not minimal, 45 is a lot. So our condolences to our brothers and sisters who lost loved ones, who may be
Definitely.
injured, and lost property, or our thoughts are there. And you've seen Jamaica take the first step in showing how it can be done. Hopefully, the other islands can learn from that. So good night, folks, and let's do this again next week, Wednesday. Have a wonderful remainder of the week. Good night.
Yeah.